The work that Rudolf Steiner brought to the public in 1904 under the title How Knowledge of the Superior Worlds is Acquired did not arise from a sudden impulse nor from a desire to impress through sensationalist revelations about hidden realities, but emerged from a deeply felt need to respond to the growing demand of sincere people seeking a practical and verifiable path to the development of spiritual capacities in an era where modern consciousness could no longer accept dogmas based solely on authority, but demanded methods that could be tested through of own experience. The historical and cultural context in which the book appeared is crucial to understanding its intent and meaning. Late 19th and early 20th century Europe saw an explosion of interest in occultism, spiritualism, and paranormal phenomena, but much of this interest was characterized by superficial curiosity, commercial sensationalism, or confusion between genuine insight and deliberate fraud or unconscious self-deception. Steiner observed with concern the situation where authentic thirst for spiritual knowledge was often exploited by charlatans or satisfied through dangerous practices that promised quick results without adequate preparation, and decided that it was necessary to present a serious and methodologically sound path that anyone willing to do real work could safely follow. The audacity of his decision to publish openly what esoteric traditions had kept secretly for millennia cannot be underestimated. He was essentially democratizing knowledge that initiatory societies considered too sacred to share with non-initiates, trusting that humanity had reached sufficient maturity to use this knowledge responsibly. This confidence was not naive, because Steiner built careful safeguards into the very method he presents: emphasis on extensive moral preparation before technical exercises, stern warnings about the dangers of hasty practice, insistence on verification by multiple criteria before accepting insights as valid, and especially honest recognition that the road is long and difficult with no genuine shortcuts available. The fundamental concept that permeates the entire book, and that distinguishes Steiner's approach from many other spiritual traditions, is the idea that the development of supersensitive perception is neither a mysterious process occurring by capricious divine grace nor a special gift bestowed on a select few, but is the natural and predictable result of systematic training that operates according to laws as regular as laws governing any other aspect of human development. This scientific perspective on spirituality was profoundly radical in an early 20th century context, and remains controversial even today, because it challenges both materialism that completely denies reality of spiritual dimensions and traditional mysticism that sees spiritual development as a mystery beyond rational understanding. Steiner was proposing a third way that simultaneously asserts that spiritual realities exist objectively and can be known through rigorous methods verifiable by any qualified investigator, just as physical realities exist objectively and can be known through scientific methods verifiable by any trained investigator. This analogy between natural science and spiritual science that Steiner develops extensively in other works is implicit throughout the book in the way it presents exercises, not as magical rituals whose workings are mysterious, but as practical techniques whose effects can be observed and understood when performed correctly. The crucial difference is that while natural science investigates external objects through physical instruments and objective methods available to any observer, spiritual science investigates inner and supersensible realities through the development of organs of perception that each person must cultivate in themselves through their own effort, making the observer simultaneously an instrument and an object of investigation in a process that is intrinsically more challenging and vulnerable to error than the investigation of external phenomena. The pedagogical framework that Steiner employs in presenting material reveals extraordinary mastery in the art of teaching complex spiritual truths in a way that minimizes risk while maximizing possibilities for genuine understanding and safe application. He does not begin with more dramatic exercises or promises of extraordinary experiences that might attract curiosity but not seriousness, but begins deliberately with material that may seem banal or even off-putting to the impatient reader. Extended discussions of the need to develop specific moral qualities before any technical practice begins. The sequence is not a pedagogical accident or organizational failure, but is an intentional choice, based on a deep understanding of real dangers that await a person who develops supersensitive abilities without having simultaneously developed the maturity of character necessary to manage them wisely. Steiner is essentially building a solid moral foundation upon which a structure of spiritual capabilities can be safely erected, knowing that attempting to build without an adequate foundation will inevitably lead to eventual collapse, even if it appears to be progressing well initially. The specific qualities he identifies as fundamental are not arbitrary selection based on personal preferences, nor are they the imposition of conventional morality, but are essential capabilities that emerge organically from the nature of spiritual development itself. Veneration or reverence as the first crucial quality is not passive submission, which Steiner in no way encourages, but is the ability to recognize that which transcends individual ego limitations and to humbly open oneself to dimensions of reality that go beyond immediate material concerns. Without this fundamental openness, consciousness remains trapped in a narrow materialistic perspective that cannot perceive spiritual values even when presented directly. Control over thought life as a second essential quality is not merely a useful skill for academic studies, but is the achievement of sovereignty over mental domain that reveals that consciousness can become master instead of slave to processes that previously completely dominated it. Balance between opposing states of experience as a third vital quality is not emotional indifference nor suppression of authentic feelings, but is the cultivation of a stable inner center that can fully experience joys and sorrows without being swept away by emotional waves to the point of losing clarity of judgment and capacity for conscious action. Positivity, as a fourth necessary quality, is not naive optimism that denies real difficulties, nor is it magical thinking that expects desires to manifest without work. But it is a deliberately developed capacity to see constructive possibilities in difficult situations and to recognize seeds of good, even in seemingly negative contexts, without allowing destructive cynicism to completely dominate perspective. Openness to new experiences and ideas as a fifth crucial quality is not gullibility that accepts everything without discrimination, nor is it relativism that considers all perspectives equally valid, but it is a willingness to honestly examine what is new without premature rejection based on established prejudices, while maintaining critical discernment that carefully evaluates before definitively accepting or rejecting. The fundamental exercise in concentration that Steiner presents as a practical entry point into spiritual training after moral preparation has the appearance of deceptive simplicity that hides extraordinary depth revealed only through serious practice, sustained over weeks and months. Basic instruction is to choose a single object of contemplation and maintain attention focused exclusively on it for a specific period, initially short but gradually expanding as capacity develops, without allowing any single thought other than contemplation of the object to enter consciousness during the duration of practice. Object can be chosen from a wide variety of possibilities. Simple physical object like stone, crystal, flower, or candle, geometric symbol like circle, triangle, or cross, abstract concept like courage, compassion, or wisdom, or short verse of deep spiritual content. What matters crucially is not the specific choice of object, but the absolute quality of concentration that is applied during the period of practice. Focus must be total, exclusive, and uninterrupted without a single deviation for the entire duration. A person who attempts this exercise for the first time with rigorous honesty, without self-deception about the quality of concentration achieved, makes a discovery that is simultaneously humiliating and liberating. Humiliating because it brutally reveals how little real control one has over mental processes. One assumes one is consciously directing, liberating, because this same honest discovery of actual incapacity is a necessary first step toward the development of genuine capacity that cannot happen while one maintains illusions about control one does not possess. In the first few days and weeks of regular practice, the typical experience is that the mind constantly escapes the chosen object by jumping to literally anything else. Worries about unfinished work, plans for future activities, memories of past conversations, bodily sensations of discomfort or hunger, ambient sounds of traffic or distant voices, even completely random thoughts with no apparent connection to anything relevant before. This chaotic mental dispersion is not a personal failure indicating particular incompetence, but is a normal state of ordinary untrained consciousness that everyone shares, but that most never observe clearly because they never attempt to maintain sustained focus on a single object for a prolonged period. The gradual transition from basic concentration to meditation proper represents qualitative advancement, where contemplation of an object is not an end in itself, but becomes a means through which consciousness penetrates deeper dimensions of reality that the object symbolizes, or through which it manifests itself. Meditation, in the specific sense that Steiner employs, has nothing to do with passive relaxation, nor with stress reduction techniques that the word often evokes in a contemporary context, but is an active process of maximum intensification of concentrated mental activity to the point where this activity transcends one's own ordinary limitations and allows access to modes of knowledge that go beyond ordinary discursive thought. The methodological procedure that Steiner outlines for meditation involves working with chosen content through a progressive sequence of phases that penetrate ever more deeply into multiple meanings encapsulated in material. First phase is to ensure completely clear intellectual understanding, where every word and concept is understood precisely without remaining ambiguity or confusion. It is not possible to meditate productively on meaning that one does not understand conceptually first, because meditation is not a replacement for clear thinking, but a deepening of it. Second phase involves active creation of imaginative visualization, where one internally constructs living and dynamic images of what concepts describe, not merely recalling previously seen images, but generating original representations that capture essences in pictorial forms. Third phase consists of allowing feelings naturally evoked by contemplation of images to penetrate deeply into emotional life, transforming disposition of soul, not merely noticing what feelings arise, but dwelling in them completely and allowing them to work transformatively. The final and most crucial fourth phase is to deliberately dissolve both conceptual thoughts and visual images and emotional feelings, while maintaining the heightened state of consciousness that has been achieved through the preparatory work of the previous three phases. In this peculiar state of inner vacuum, where ordinary mental activity has been transcended, but consciousness remains perfectly alert without slipping into drowsiness or daydreaming, optimal conditions are created so that genuine, supersensible perceptions can emerge spontaneously as revelations of objective realities rather than as products of subjective imagination fabricating fantasies. The progressive transformation of dream life that dedicated practitioners universally report, after weeks or months of regular practice, provides some of the first tangible evidence that exercise is producing real effects at deep levels of consciousness beyond superficial improvements in waking concentration. Dreams that were previously chaotic, fragmented, bizarre, and seemingly meaningless begin gradually to become more ordered in narrative structure, more vivid and detailed in sensory qualities of colors and shapes and sounds, and especially more charged with coherent symbolisms that seem to communicate significant messages about important life issues, or convey insights into the nature of reality that waking consciousness has failed to grasp. This qualitative change in dream life is not merely psychological in the sense of reorganization of existing mental contents, but is a sign that the center of consciousness is beginning to operate in dimensions that transcend limitations of the physical body and material brain. Eventually, for practitioners who persist disciplinedly through months and years, an entirely new category of nocturnal experience emerges that Steiner carefully distinguishes from ordinary, even enhanced dreams, what he calls imaginative consciousness or perception during sleep, where one is not dreaming in the usual sense but is genuinely perceiving realities in etheric and astral dimensions that express themselves through the universal language of archetypal symbolic images rather than abstract concepts or concrete physical forms. These imaginative perceptions have distinctive characteristics that clearly distinguish them from ordinary dreams for those who experience them. There is an unmistakable sense of being completely awake and conscious even while the physical body sleeps soundly. There's the ability to voluntarily direct attention and examine details of scenes that appear rather than being passively dragged through dream sequences. There is clarity and stability comparable to sensory perception while awake. Red, and crucially, there is complete and detailed memory upon awakening rather than vague fragments that quickly evaporate as ordinary dreams inevitably do. The dramatic and potentially terrifying encounter with the figure Steiner calls the guardian of the lesser threshold represents a profound and definitive psychological test that separates those who have developed adequate moral preparation from those who still require substantial additional work before it is safe to proceed beyond a certain point in developing supersensitive capacities. This guardian is not an independent external entity imposing arbitrary proof as a capricious obstacle, nor is it a demon sent by evil forces to block spiritual progress, but is the concentrated objectification and personification of literally everything in its own individual nature that still remains unrecognized consciously, unworked on systematically through deliberate effort of transformation, and unpurified adequately through sustained moral discipline. Every weakness of character that a person carries but minimizes or rationalizes, every selfish impulse that operates but is not consciously admitted, every destructive pattern of thought or emotion or behavior that is compulsively repeated without interruption, every comfortable self-deception that allows one to maintain illusions about oneself, every unrealized potential that remains dormant rather than developed, all of these appear simultaneously gathered and concentrated in a single figure that confronts the person with brutal and unquestionable clarity, revealing the complete totality of self-imperfection that ordinary consciousness has achieved. Avoid looking directly through multiple psychological defense mechanisms. The specific detailed form that Guardian takes varies dramatically from person to person because it reflects the particular and unique configuration of defects, shadows, and undeveloped aspects of each individuality. Person whose dominant untransformed defect is material avarice may see Guardian as grotesque and disgusting monster, compulsively accumulating treasures he can never enjoy. Person inflated by unrecognized spiritual pride may see arrogant and despotic tyrant universally hated and feared by all. Person paralyzed by unconfronted fear and cowardice can see a pathetic and despicable creature constantly hiding and running away from challenges and responsibilities. The profound purpose of this confrontation, which can be psychologically devastating for those who are not prepared, is not sadistic punishment imposed by superior forces, nor is it gratuitous torture, but is an absolutely necessary revelation that forces honest and inescapable recognition of the reality of how much true work of inner transformation remains to be done, and how immensely far one really is from the spiritual perfection that one may have imagined one was close to achieving before. This confrontation has shattered comfortable illusions. Steiner emphasizes that successful passage through this guardian cannot be achieved through brute willpower nor through forced techniques, but requires three essential moral qualities operating harmoniously. First, extraordinary and authentic courage to face the full truth about oneself without fleeing into psychological denial or succumbing to paralyzing despair. Second, deep and genuine humility to accept that spiritual development is a vast process that spans eons and is just beginning rather than nearly complete. Third, renewed and strengthened determination to continue the work of purification with sustained patience, even though we now clearly know how immense and challenging the task is that lies ahead through the remainder of the current life and probably through multiple future incarnations. The meticulous and gradual development of organs of spiritual perception that Steiner describes using terminology of lotus flowers or chakras borrowed but significantly reinterpreted from Eastern traditions represents real and objective transformation that occurs in the functional structure of the etheric body through years of correct meditation practices performed with consistent patience and discipline. The etheric body, which during ordinary life is perfectly molded around the physical body following its contours, like a fitted glove begins through specific exercises to develop new mobility and plasticity, allowing it to extend beyond strict boundaries of physical skin, and especially begins to form highly organized and functionally specialized structures in locations corresponding approximately to certain regions. Steiner describes in detail these structures as vortices or whirlpools of etheric force with specific numbers of petals and particular functions. Two-petaled flower between eyebrows, when fully developed, allows direct perception of the thoughts and mental activity of another S, conscious beings. 16-petaled flower in the throat allows understanding of universal spiritual laws governing natural phenomena. 12-petaled flower in the heart region allows perception of moral qualities and inner dispositions of souls. 10-petaled flower in the solar plexus allows perception of vital etheric forces operating in living organisms. The warning that Steiner repeats with extreme urgency and absolute seriousness is that the development of these etheric structures should never be forced or artificially accelerated through intense and prolonged concentration on specific physical locations of the body, nor through the violent breathing manipulation exercises that some schools of Eastern Yoga employ. Such methods are extremely dangerous and can cause severe permanent damage to a delicate nervous system, create deep and lasting psychological imbalances that may require years to correct if correction is possible, and even precipitate debilitating physical illnesses, seriously compromising health. Instead, flowers develop naturally, organically, and gradually as a beneficial side effect of meditation on morally high spiritual contents practiced regularly, combined with systematic cultivation of moral virtues in everyday life. And any attempt to accelerate the process through forced techniques is a clear sign of selfish impatience that completely contradicts the attitude of disinterested devotion and humble patience that are absolutely necessary for safe and balanced, authentic spiritual development. The extraordinary ability to read the Akashic chronicle that Steiner mentions as one of the most advanced developments possible of supersensitive perception allows the spiritual investigator, adequately trained through decades of disciplined practice, to directly access the etheric record that is simultaneously complete and permanent of literally every event that has ever occurred anywhere in the cosmos since the absolute beginning of evolution. This chronicle is not a physical library containing written volumes, nor a digital database storing information in electronic form, but it is a real dimension of spiritual reality where absolutely everything that happens, at any level of manifestation from the densest physical to the highest spiritual, leaves a permanent impression on subtle etheric substance permeating the entire universe. An impression that can be perceived and read by sufficiently developed consciousness in a way vaguely analogous to how a paleontologist reads history in layers of sedimentary rocks, or an astronomer reads the past in the light of distant stars. The crucial distinction between three progressive stages of genuine, supersensible knowledge that Steiner establishes provides an essential conceptual map of the territory the student must traverse. Conscious imagination as perception of spiritual realities in the form of living symbolic images, inspiration as direct understanding of meanings that images express, and spiritual intuition as complete union through identification, where all separation between knower and known is transcended. The book's enduring legacy is an open invitation that remains valid through generations, for every sincere person to discover, through their own verifiable efforts, that conscious spiritual development is the real possibility and natural destiny of evolving humanity. The absolutely crucial methodological question of how to confidently distinguish genuine, supersensible perceptions from the vast array of possible illusions, subjective fantasies produced by uncontrolled imagination, and unconscious projections of one's own psychic contents that masquerade as objective perceptions, is a problem that Steiner approaches with extraordinary seriousness, because he recognizes that in the early and intermediate stages of development, when critical capacity for discrimination is not yet fully refined, the danger of self-deception is immense, and the consequences of accepting illusions as authentic perceptions can be devastating. For further development, it offers the full battery of multiple rigorous criteria that must be applied systematically without exception to absolutely any supersensible experience before accepting it, even provisionally, as a potentially valid perception of objective reality, rather than as a product of internal subjective processes. First fundamental criterion is consistent stability across independent repeated observations performed on separate occasions. Genuine perception of spiritual object or being or process must remain essentially the same and recognizable when observed multiple times on different days or weeks, whereas subjective fantasy or illusion produced by transient psychological states characteristically tends to change capriciously from observation to observation or disappear altogether when critically examined rather than credulously accepted. Mind. Second essential criterion is complete independence from conscious personal desires and established expectations. Perception that merely confirms exactly what one wants to see or already expects to see, based on prior beliefs, should be strongly suspected as unconscious projection of one's own psychic contents rather than perception of external realities, while perception that genuinely surprises or even contradicts expectations and preferences is significantly more likely to be objective, because it is not being shaped by psychological processes distorting observation. Third important criterion is fundamental coherence with well-established knowledge of both ordinary natural science and spiritual science, developed through investigations by multiple qualified researchers over time. Perception that violates fundamental principles without offering superior and more comprehensive explanation must be seriously questioned and subjected to rigorous additional testing. Fourth valuable criterion is correspondence, at least in fundamental respects, with independent observations of other genuinely qualified spiritual investigators. Although individual perceptions are necessarily unique and specific to each observer due to differences in development and perspective, there must be substantial areas of basic agreement about fundamental structures of spiritual reality when multiple appropriately trained independent observers report findings. A fifth useful but not sufficient criterion on its own is demonstrable practical utility, where genuine perception eventually leads to expanded understanding that produces verifiable and beneficial results in ordinary life. The absolutely critical importance that Steiner repeatedly assigns throughout the entire book to the maintenance of completely normal, balanced, and functional outer life throughout the process of inner spiritual development reveals a profound understanding of the multiple and serious dangers of imbalance that can arise when a person allows spiritual practices to interfere negatively with ordinary responsibilities of physical existence in the material world. Authentic and healthy spiritual development should invariably strengthen and enhance the ability to function effectively in the ordinary physical world, rather than progressively alienating a person from it or making him less able to adequately fulfill the practical duties of professional work, close family relationships, and broader social obligations. If spiritual work is making a person less competent in a chosen profession, less emotionally present and available in important relationships with family and friends, less reliable in fulfilling commitments made and responsibilities accepted, then something is fundamentally wrong with the approach being followed, and practices are being misused in ways that require immediate correction before more serious harm occurs. Steiner articulates a clear ideal of a person who, to the casual outside observer, appears completely ordinary and socially well-adjusted, without behavioral peculiarities that would attract unnecessary attention or public claims to special powers, or extraordinary achievements that would create sensation and unhealthy curiosity, but who is inwardly and privately undergoing profound transformations of consciousness through regular practices and patiently cultivating perceptual capacities that dramatically transcend limitations of ordinary consciousness. This harmonious integration of progressive spiritual development with ordinary practical life guards against the equally serious double danger of spiritual escapism, where one uses practices as a way of avoiding facing concrete responsibilities and real challenges of physical material existence, and of materialistic stagnation, where one becomes so completely absorbed in worldly concerns and immediate needs that he totally neglects the spiritual dimension of human existence, which is equally real, and perhaps more fundamental than the material dimension. The profound transformation of relationship to death that spiritual development inevitably produces represents one of the most liberating and deeply comforting shifts in perspective on existence that the path offers to dedicated practitioners who persist through years of disciplined work. When a person learns through regular meditation practices, sustained over time to repeatedly experience states of consciousness that operate independently of the physical body and material brain processes, when he progressively develops the ability to maintain a continuous thread of clearly focused awareness, even when the body is completely relaxed and all external senses are turned off, when he gradually begins to perceive directly through experience, his own etheric body and astral body as a vehicle, real glasses of consciousness that are distinct from physical body. Although interpenetrated during physical life, primitive instinctive fear of death, this total annihilation of identity and absolute end of conscious existence, dissolves naturally without forced effort, because person now knows through gained direct knowledge rather than accepted belief that consciousness is neither absolutely limited to physical body nor completely dependent on material brain, and that it can continue to operate when physical body ceases to function permanently. This liberating understanding is not based on religious faith that accepts doctrines about immortality without possible verification, nor on the psychologically necessary but objectively unfounded consoling hope that death is not actually a definitive end, but is solidly based on direct and repeatedly verified knowledge gained through specific practices that allow one to experience temporary separation between consciousness and body during current physical life, providing direct, empirical evidence that consciousness can exist and function independently of the body. Steiner describes physical death as essentially a permanent and irreversible version of separation between consciousness and body that happens temporarily and reversibly every night, during deep, dreamless sleep. The main difference being that during ordinary sleep, the etheric body remains firmly connected to the physical body through vital bonds, allowing eventual return of consciousness upon awakening. Whereas in physical death, the etheric body also completely separates from the physical body, breaking vital bonds, making return to the same physical body impossible, although consciousness continues to exist in non-physical dimensions. The ultimate transformative vision that emerges from prolonged in-depth study and sustained dedicated practice with this extraordinary book is of the spiritual path as an essentially infinite progressive journey of continued self-discovery, systematic self-transformation, and increasing self-realization that continues uninterruptedly through the totality of present physical life and extends far beyond physical death through multiple future incarnations in the eternal process of ascending. Spiritual evolution toward goals that are so immensely distant that they can barely be glimpsed from present perspective, but that exert powerful magnetic attraction, guiding progressive development through of eons. Steiner does not present spiritual development as a finite, time-limited achievement that can be achieved definitively, allowing one to relax contentedly into a final state of permanent perfect achievement, but as an essentially never-ending process of perpetual growth and continual transformation, where each level of ability and understanding achieved through arduous effort inevitably reveals completely new horizons awaiting exploration with renewed wonder, and even vaster depths awaiting penetration with determination, strengthened by the experience of previous partial successes. This perspective of literally infinite evolution extending through the limitless future naturally maintains authentic humility and genuine openness, even at relatively advanced stages of development, because it always remains absolutely clear that there is infinitely more to learn than has already been learned, always higher levels of consciousness and perception to reach than those already achieved, always additional aspects of one's nature that require deeper moral purification and greater spiritual refinement. The path remains perpetually open, inviting each generation of sincere seekers to discover by their own effort and verification truths that external authority, although